get through the
All
whole.
right, okay. Our meditations are going to be based on the last of our guidelines. You've probably seen this posted around the center. I don't know if I'll share it because I only made 4 copies. But the last guideline is, the very bottom one, is we strive to find or seek spiritual solutions to personal and interpersonal problems. So we're going to have 3 meditations. First one is just going to be about spiritual solutions, what that means. Then tomorrow morning, I'm going to do the last 2 in reverse order, and I'll explain why. We'll do interpersonal problems, and then we'll do personal problems. And I'm going to use the 3 gospel canticles. Those are the hymns that are said at the daily office, and they all come from St. Luke, and they're all about the incarnation. They're the Benedictus, which is said at morning prayer, and that's the song of Zechariah, the father of St. John the Baptist. And then at evening prayer, this is the Magnificat, the song of Mary. And then also evening prayer and at Compline, like we said tonight, the Nunc Dimittis, which is the song of Simeon, who waited years and years and years in the temple to see Jesus. And each one of them sort of has a different direction. So the Nunc, you can sort of think of it as like this direction, like is directing from me to God. The Benedictus is like this, me and everybody out here. And the Magnificat kind of is this away, where it's God down here to me. So we're going to take each one of those, and we're going to kind of start a little bit in reverse order, but since we just said Compline, it'll work out well because we're going to start with the Nunc Dimittis, which is really the last one of them. And it's at the point when the old day is passing away and the new day is coming along. And remember in the Hebrew dating, the day would begin at sundown. So you're already sort of looking forward to the new day. And the first 2 words in the English translation are Lord, now. So we're going to meditate on those 2 words, Lord, now, what it means. Because God is the eternal present. So in a sense, God is always now. And we're always saying, Lord, now. When God revealed himself to Moses, remember in the burning bush, Moses asked what his name was. And he said, I am that I am. And that's where the Hebrew name of God comes from, is from that declaration of that God is. And in the Hebrew, it sort of means he who is, or I am that I am. And sometimes you'll see icons and they have the halo of Jesus, and they have, a cross like this. And in English, it'll say I am. And in the Greek, it'll say ha, which is the, and on. So it's a short O and then a long O and an N, means the one who is. So it's a way of connecting Jesus with the burning bush. And you might remember Aslan said, all times for me are soon. But, or in a sense, they're all now. He's always there. Everything is present. So God sees all of human history, all of the history of the whole universe as one. I sort of think of it as kind of like a great big huge enormous canvas, that God's painted the whole history on. And for the characters in the canvas, they only see, like what's happening, like this in this little timeline. But God sees the whole as one. That's how God, of course, with any analogy, you can't take it too far because it's going to break down. But I myself, when I was about y'all's age, I was a big old rapturous. You're going to be surprised by this. I was all into the end time prophecy. And like I read, there are all these books. It was back in the 80s and 90s, and like all these authorities were writing all these books about, like the restored Israel and the temple was going to come and blah, 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 and the Antichrist. And one of the things that I think appealed to me about it is like the secret gnosis. And gnosis means knowledge that only a select few have. And if you've ever heard of the Gnostics, that was an early sort of kind of a heresy, but also kind of its own religion, sort of parallel with Christianity, that believed in all these secrets that the regular old Christians didn't know. And the other thing that I think appealed to me about having that secret gnosis is a sense of control. So like, I know I can control, I know what's going to happen. But the biblical message, or the biblical teaching, is very clear and simple, which is that it could happen anytime. Jesus was clear about that. He's going to come like a thief in the night, or in the gospel for this coming Sunday, it's going to be like lightning coming out of the east. And so you're not going to know. None of us is going to know. So the point is to be ready for it whenever it happens. And C.S. Lewis points out in one of his essays that if there were some key that you could use to unlock these puzzles or mysteries, then it would make that belief in not knowing it, it would, there's a spiritual element of that, because it makes it so that we always have to be ready. And it would make that doctrine of no use to all the generations before that one generation that is the final one. And there's part of me that I'm worried that there's going to be one kook who winds up being right. And we're going to spend all eternity with him going, I told you he was coming on September 28th at 4:30 in the afternoon. But I'm sure God's going to figure out a way to, not make that happen, or to fulfill it or redeem it. So what a spiritual solution means, that's what we're concentrating on now, is God's will in the moment. God's always present. We always have to be waiting for God. We always have to be ready, and that God in the moment is here with us. So it's our job to discern and to pray and listen and to hear and to heed what God's will is. And there used to be a song, One Day at a Time, Sweet Jesus. And I went to a public middle school, and at every assembly, our music teacher would have the chorus either sing The Sun Will Come Out Tomorrow from Annie, or One Day at a Time, Sweet Jesus. And I think it was just because nobody was going to tell her that her choir could not sing One Day at a Time, Sweet Jesus, even though I'm sure it was probably not constitutionally correct. And there's a truth in that, one day at a time, taking it one day at a time. But there's, I think, an even deeper truth in saying one moment at a time. Like, we can't just rest on our laurels and say, well, I got up this morning and I said my prayers, so I'm good for the rest of the day. Because every moment we have to be open and receptive to God's prayer. And there's a Saint Jane Frances de Chantal, and her spiritual director was St. Francis de Sales. He was her second spiritual director, and she was a French noblewoman. And she earlier had a spiritual director who really didn't understand her own soul and how to guide her. And one of the servants said, well, when Madame was made to pray thrice a day, she was a bother to everyone. But now that she's made to pray at all times, she's a bother to no one. So St. Francis de Sales taught her how to be always at prayer. Instead of just, because a lot of times we think, oh, I need this time to pray, this time to pray, that time to pray. And those markers, those barriers, those bookends are important, but they're not to be an end unto itself. They're there to guide us so that we are always in the attitude of prayer, always seeking God's will, always conscious of God's presence with us. And we get into spiritual problems because we're not satisfied with the moment. We're not satisfied with what's right before us. Actually, just today, somebody was asking me about my car, and I was talking to him about it, and I said, but the next car, because this one has heated seats, and I'm like, but the next car is going to have a heated steering wheel, because my hands get really cold. And then I said, look, here I am. I admitted, I'm never satisfied with what I have right in front of me. I'm always looking ahead, thinking about the next thing, instead of just being content with God, with what God's provided for me, and being satisfied with it. Because God really ultimately gives us even more than we need. The thing is, we just don't appreciate it. We don't notice it. We don't look for it. And we are not prepared, really, to meet him in the moment, because our heart is not seeking his will, his grace, acknowledging his presence. Now, we were talking earlier about 9/11, and not all moments are happy. And you also think of school shootings, and there's some, bless their hearts, I call them chipper Christians. And they're always happy, and they're always bouncy and everything. They're always like, I just know God's got something great in store for you. But there are moments where we can admit this is terrible what's going on. And there's also people who are like, well, whatever is happening, I know that's just what God wanted for me to experience, or that's what God provided for me. That's what God knew I needed. And so I don't feel authorized to say, if somebody goes into an elementary school and shoots up a bunch of children, or somebody flies a plane into a building, I can't say, oh, that's just what God knew those people needed. They needed that. But I can say that God is in the pain, God's in the suffering. And so God is in the midst of those trials and those hard times, because that's what the whole story of the cross is, that God himself became man and took on suffering. And in fact, that's what all the gospel canticles are all about. They are about God becoming present in our midst. So that brings us back to our gospel canticle for this lesson, the Nunc Dimittis. And it comes from the pinnacle of the Nativity cycle. So 40 days after Christmas is the Feast of the Presentation of Christ in the temple. And so it's commanded in the old law that any male that opened the womb, that 40 days later you would present him to the Lord. So when God established that, he knew exactly what he was doing, and then he, as it were, submits to his own law. He submits to what he set up. So 40 days afterwards, they bring the baby Jesus into the temple, and there is Saint Simeon, who's an old man, and he's been told that he'll be able to see the Messiah, the anointed, before he dies. And so then he says that canticle, Lord, now lettest thou thy servant depart in peace. So he's been waiting for God all this time. And then he sees God in the flesh right in his midst. And then he also tells our Lord's mother that a sword will pierce her soul as well. So he prepares her for that pain and the tough times that are coming ahead. But it also points to the redemption that God will effect through that suffering. But then there's one more story. St. Luke's Gospel is the one we especially associate with a lot of the infancy narrative. St. Matthew tells some as well. He tells about the visit of the Magi, but a lot of St. Luke has 2 whole chapters that are the incarnation and the nativity and the boyhood of Jesus before he gets to the manhood. And there's one last story, which we read at evening prayer, of Jesus being 12 years old and being lost and found in the temple. And it's interesting because it happens right where he's on the cusp of going from a boy to a man. And so how they would have traveled is the women and the children would all travel together, and then the men would all travel together. So he's at that age that Mary probably assumed that he was with Joseph. And Joseph probably thought of him still as a boy, as a child, traveling with Mary. So you wonder, well, how did, God allowed that heartbreak and that confusion right there in the Holy Family, in the holiest family there ever was. Because for 3 days, they were searching all around. They didn't know where he was. And so, of course, that points forward to the 3 days, Good Friday and Holy Saturday and Easter Day. It's redemptive suffering that comes into focus, or is finally brought to fulfillment or redemption in the cross. When they meet him, when they find him, we have the first recorded words of the incarnate Word. And he says, "How is it that you sought me? Wist ye not that I must be about my Father's business? Did you not know I must be in my Father's house?" So that's how we are always to be. We're supposed to follow his example and always be about his Father's business. That's really is what the point of a spiritual solution is to be about our Father's business, or be in our Father's house. And then it ends with what to me is one of the most astounding verses in all of Holy Scripture, because it says that then he went down to Nazareth and he was subject unto them. So think about that God in the flesh becomes subject to these Galilean peasants, these nobodies. And one of them isn't even his biological parent. He's a step parent, he's a foster parent. And God says yes and obeys them. The one who created them, that's the mystery of the incarnation, that God created Mary, and yet she gave birth to him. He created the very womb that gave birth to him. So Jesus then, throughout his life, is saying, "Now, Lord." He's ready to do God his Father's will in the moment, in the present. And in this particular story, it was his will that he be about his Father's business. So he's reminding us that even above obeying our earthly parents, we are called to obey, to submit to the will of our Father who is in heaven. So I've got a couple of discussion questions for you, and we can talk a little bit. So what does the phrase spiritual solutions mean to you? What do you think of that? And how are you doing with praying, "Now, Lord"? How is that? Is that part of your prayer life? Do you find yourself praying, "Not now, Lord"? Maybe.
I think that it kind of maybe about with terms in terms of spiritual solution is that it doesn't necessarily have to be a spiritual solution as in let's pray about it sort of thing, or just do that. As much as I think solutions should be led by the Spirit, and that you can still be, I guess, more physically active as long as you're doing the right thing that God is leading you to do.
Yeah, that's a good point, because sometimes we think, well, we have to be a chipper Christian and be always about, well, let me pray on it.
Yeah.
And that's good, but sometimes in the moment you just have to be trusting in God and be always at prayer. That means that your spirit is always connecting with God, but it doesn't mean that you've got to be all sanctimonious and holier than thou about it.
I find myself often underneath my breath asking, God help me with something, especially during woodworking, when if I go too far in with the knife, it's the whole project's ruined. It's God help me with my hands so I don't screw this up, or just small stuff like that.
Oh, I have to tell you all about when I went to Target today. Okay. And because I was going to go before the noon mass, and I had to pick up a space heater because our space heater broke in the chapel. And I ordered it online, and I clicked to pick it up because the other day I'd gone to pick up those air mattresses and there wasn't any line. So I went and there was a big old line and the woman up there, she was taking forever, and then there were a couple people, and there was a woman in front of me and she had a little baby in the front of her cart who was very precious. And so then I was like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to have time. And then finally that woman got done, and then the next two people were really quick. And I thought, I really should ask this lady, is her thing going to be complicated, and tell her that I've got to get to Mass. And she had a bag in her buggy. And then I was like, oh no, okay, I'll be at peace with it, you know, I won't be demanding. And she got up there, and it turned out she had ordered her thing to pick up in the parking lot, but she had come into the store and bought something instead of something she had out there, and she needed to exchange it, and the woman was like, oh, well, it's gonna take a while because I've got to go out there, and you could tell the woman didn't want to do it. And so then I was like, oh no, why didn't I ask her? I only have this one thing I had to pick up. And so she went out and got it, finally came back, and then, to add insult to injury, she had put it on her husband's credit card, so there's all this about on the credit card. So I was trying to think, well, why is God allowing this to happen? And I think the answer was so that I could make googly eyes to the little lady, because she was really quick. And it also taught me, okay, because I get really judgmental when I pull in and there are all those spaces to pick up your pre-order.
Yeah, there's no place for you to park.
Yeah,
and then you
'cause
wanna park in the pre.
And because I think it is not 2020 anymore. Don't tell me you're so afraid of COVID that you're going to force them to come bring your
No, I
stuff
think they're
out
just
to you.
lazy.
Yeah, and I'm like, you're so lazy. And then I decided after that, I am shamelessly going to take advantage of that now. And I made it like just about a minute before Mass. But then when I was talking to that guy, I told you after Mass about my car, and I said to him, well, if that's my biggest complaint of the day, then I need to get on my knees and thank the Lord. So you know, I think even when those annoyances happen, it can help us put everything in perspective and realize, you know, I have it pretty good, the fact that I even have a car and I can go to Target, and I know I shouldn't shop at Target because they're too woke. So I do feel guilty about that. But they did put Merry Christmas signs up. Yeah.
You know, they're supposed to be putting bars in those now, right?
Yeah.
Oh Lord. With the
Targaretas.
Targaretas.
Oh, are they? Anyway, okay, back to the questions. Okay, anybody else want to say how you're praying through Lord now? How does that apply to your prayer life, and how are you seeking spiritual solutions? Anybody?
That's pretty similar to the first one, isn't it?
Those are the questions. Those were the first questions asked.
Oh, that.
Yeah, so
He's
I'm
just
repeating
repeating.
them.
Okay, you're repeating. Okay, yes.
Yeah, or maybe somebody in our home audience wants to answer. You can think about that yourself, home audience.
Pause when you come up with it and come up with an answer yourself.
Comment down below what you think your answer would be.
I read every comment.
If you like this question, click subscribe.
Yeah, mash that subscribe button.
Mash the
I guess I'll close it off with that. Okay. Bye bye.